Have you ever seen a picture of Earth from space at night? It's breathtaking. You see these clusters of light shimmering against the darkness. That's us. That's humanity. Europe is a blaze of gold. North America glows intensely, and parts of Asia sparkle like a spilled jar of glitter. And then you look at Africa. For a long time, the narrative was that it was the dark continent, and from space it might seem that way, with vast stretches of quiet darkness. But don't let that fool you. That darkness isn't emptiness. It's a different kind of life, a different rhythm. Those specks of light you do see, Lagos, Cairo, Johannesburg, are some of the most vibrant, energetic and alive places on the planet. This continent isn't dark, it's just seen through a distorted lens. From that satellite view, you don't see any borders. You just see this massive, beautiful landmass, a cradle of humanity connected by rivers, deserts and savannas. It's a single, powerful shape on the globe. But zoom in closer, and you start to see the lines. Straight, unnatural lines drawn across deserts and through mountains, lines that slice through communities that have existed for thousands of years. These lines weren't drawn by the people who live there. They weren't carved by ancient kingdoms or decided by local chiefs. They were drawn in a cold room, thousands of miles away, by men who probably couldn't even point to the places they were claiming on a map, without a little help from their assistants. Those lights you see from space represent more than just electricity and infrastructure. They represent resilience. They represent cities humming with innovation, art, music, and a hustle that's second to none. They are the glowing embers of cultures that have withstood centuries of attempts to extinguish them. And the darker areas? That's where you find incredible biodiversity, ancient traditions, and communities living in harmony with the land in ways much of the world has forgotten. The story of Africa isn't one of darkness, but one of a persistent, powerful light that refuses to be dimmed, no matter who tries to lay claim to the switch. It's a continent of immense wealth, not just in gold and diamonds, but in people and spirit. So when we ask the question, who owns Africa? That view from space is the perfect place to start, because it shows you two Africas. There's the Africa that is a single, unified cradle of life, rich with its own history and future. And then there is the Africa that has been sliced and diced, a collection of territories to be fought over and controlled. The tension between these two realities is the story of modern Africa. It's a story of outside forces trying to impose their will and a powerful internal spirit that continually pushes back, reminding the world that this continent has its own soul, its own destiny, and its own owners. And let's rewind the clock to 1884. Picture a grand meeting room in Berlin, Germany. It's filled with powerful European men in fancy suits and mustaches, sipping tea and brandy. They've gathered for what history calls the Berlin Conference. What was on the agenda? The future of Africa. They were there to set the rules for how they would colonize and divide the continent among themselves. It was like a twisted, high-stakes game of Monopoly, but with real land, real resources, and real people's lives. They laid a map of Africa on a table, and with rulers and pencils, started drawing lines. This part's for you, Belgium. This bit looks good for you, Britain. France, you take this massive chunk over here. The most insane part of this whole affair? There were no Africans in the room, not a single one. Imagine your neighbors getting together to decide who gets your bedroom, who gets your kitchen, and who gets your dog, and you're not even invited to the meeting. That's exactly what happened to an entire continent. These European powers, Britain, France, Germany, Portugal, Belgium, and others, carved up Africa based on their own interests. They wanted the rubber, the diamonds, the gold, the palm oil. They didn't care about the existing kingdoms, the ethnic groups, the languages, or the ancient rivalries. They just drew lines. Lines on maps that would soon become lines of blood in the soil. These artificial borders became one of the most destructive legacies of colonialism. Suddenly, communities that had been neighbors for centuries were now in different countries, separated by a colonial fence. Worse, rival groups who had historically fought each other were now forced to live together within the same newly formed nation, governed by a European power that often played them against each other to maintain control. This strategy, known as divide and rule, was brutally effective. It sowed seeds of discord and mistrust that would erupt into devastating civil wars and conflicts long after the colonizers officially left. The map they drew in Berlin wasn't just a map, it was a blueprint for future chaos. So when people talk about instability or conflict in some parts of Africa today, it's impossible to understand the root cause without looking back at this moment. The Berlin Conference wasn't just a historical event, it was the beginning of a long, painful process of exploitation and disruption. It established a precedent that Africa was a prize to be won, a resource to be extracted, and that its fate could be decided by outsiders. This mindset, that Africa is up for grabs, didn't disappear when the colonial flags came down. It just changed its clothes and learned to speak the language of diplomacy, trade, and security. Fast forward to today. The old colonial empires have officially packed their bags. African nations celebrate Independence Days with parades and patriotic songs. On the surface, it seems like Africa is finally in control of its own destiny. But if you look closely, you'll see that the scramble for Africa never really ended. It just evolved. The game is the same, but the players and the rules have changed. It's no longer about planting flags and sending in governors in pith helmets. The new scramble is quieter, more subtle. It's fought in boardrooms, through loan agreements, with infrastructure projects, and with military contracts. It's a battle for influence, resources, and strategic advantage. The old powers are still around, of course. France, for example, maintains significant economic and military ties with many of its former colonies in West Africa, a relationship that many critics argue is still deeply neo-colonial. The currency used by 14 West and Central African nations, the CFA franc, was until recently pegged to the French treasury, giving France a huge amount of economic leverage. But the old guard now has competition. New global powers have entered the arena, and they've come with deep pockets and big promises. They see Africa's immense potential, its youthful population, its vast mineral wealth, and its growing markets, and they all want a piece of the pie. This modern scramble is often framed as a partnership, a win-win situation. Foreign countries offer to build much-needed roads, railways, and ports. They provide loans for development projects and sell advanced technology. In return, they gain access to Africa's natural resources: cobalt for our smartphones, oil for our cars, uranium for our power plants. They also secure valuable political allies on the world stage. But this partnership often comes with strings attached. The loans can lead to crippling debt. The infrastructure projects often use foreign labor instead of local workers, and the resource deals can be incredibly one-sided, benefiting the foreign corporation far more than the African nation. So while the methods have changed, the fundamental dynamic remains eerily similar to the one established back in Berlin. Decisions that will shape the future of African nations are still being heavily influenced, if not outright dictated, by foreign interests. The continent's wealth is still flowing outwards, and its destiny is still being tied to the ambitions of powers from across the sea. The scramble continues, not with armies of conquest, but with armies of engineers, diplomats, and financiers. The question for Africa is how to navigate this complex new game without once again losing control of the board. So, who are these new players vying for influence in Africa? Let's start with the one you hear about most often: China. For the last 2 decades, China has been on a building spree across the continent. They are constructing everything from gleaming new airports and superhighways to presidential palaces and massive hydroelectric dams. When African leaders need a big project done fast, they often turn to Beijing. China's approach is typically no political strings attached, which means they don't lecture countries about human rights or democracy. They just want to do business. This has made them a very attractive partner for many African governments who are tired of being lectured by the West. But this partnership is a double-edged sword. The massive loans used to fund these projects have left some African nations in staggering debt to China, raising fears of a new kind of economic colonialism. If a country can't pay back its loan, what does China ask for in return? Control of a strategic port, access to mineral rights. The projects also often bring in Chinese workers, meaning the jobs and skills don't always transfer to the local population. So while the new highway might look impressive, the benefits for the average citizen can be harder to see. It's a complex relationship that's reshaping the continent's landscape, both literally and economically. Then, you have Russia. Russia's playbook is different. They aren't focused on building roads, they're focused on security. Moscow offers military hardware, training, and, most controversially, private military contractors like the Wagner Group. In countries facing instability or insurgency, Russian mercenaries offer a quick, if brutal, solution. They prop up governments, protect mining operations, and fight rebels, often operating in the shadows. In exchange, Russia gains geopolitical footholds and, you guessed it, lucrative access to natural resources like gold and diamonds. It's a strategy that appeals to leaders who feel threatened and want a security partner who won't ask too many questions. And of course, we can't forget the United States. America's involvement is largely framed around counter-terrorism, democracy promotion, and humanitarian aid. The US has a significant military presence on the continent through its Africa Command, or AFRICOM. This includes military bases, drone operations, and training programs for African armies. The stated goal is to help African nations fight extremist groups like Al-Shabaab and Boko Haram. But like the others, America's presence is also about protecting its own strategic interests, including competing with the influence of China and Russia and ensuring the flow of resources like oil. Each of these global powers is playing a high-stakes game of chess, and the African continent is the board. Let's talk more about the American military presence in Africa, because it raises some really tough questions. The United States Africa Command, AFRICOM, was established in 2007. The official mission is to build defense capabilities and promote security and stability on the continent. This translates to drone bases in places like Niger and Djibouti, special forces operations, and joint military exercises with African partners. On paper, it sounds like a noble cause. I mean, who wouldn't want help fighting terrorism? The idea is that a US presence can train local forces and provide the high-tech intelligence needed to stop extremist groups before they grow. But here's a staggering fact that should make everyone pause. General Michael Langley, the commander of AFRICOM, recently pointed out a deeply troubling trend. He noted that before this significant American military engagement began, the level of terrorism in Africa was estimated to be around 2% of global incidents. Today, after years of boots-on-the-ground drone strikes and security partnerships, that number has skyrocketed. It now stands at 43%. Let that sink in, a 41-point increase. Instead of decreasing, violent extremism has exploded across regions where foreign militaries are most active, particularly in the Sahel. This forces us to ask a very uncomfortable question. Is the strategy working, or could it be making things worse? Critics argue that the presence of foreign troops on African soil can be a powerful recruiting tool for extremist groups. They can paint the national government as a puppet of Western powers and position themselves as the true defenders of their land and faith. Furthermore, drone strikes, even when they target militants, often result in civilian casualties. Every innocent life lost creates a new cycle of grief and anger, potentially pushing more people towards radical groups who promise revenge. The war on terror can become a self-perpetuating machine. So while the intention might be to bring stability, the result appears to be the opposite. The very presence meant to quell violence may be acting as a fertilizer for it. It's a paradox that policymakers in Washington seem reluctant to confront. The solution to instability might not be more soldiers, more drones, and more bases. Perhaps the focus on a military solution has distracted from addressing the root causes of extremism, poverty, lack of education, corrupt governance, and a sense of hopelessness. It seems the boots on the ground have kicked up a storm of questions in the air, and the answers aren't looking good. When a foreign power builds a new port or a highway, it's presented as a gift, it's development, it's progress. But honestly, we have to look deeper and ask, progress for whom? Is that new road being built to help a farmer get his crops to market more easily? Or is it being built to help a foreign mining company get cobalt out of the country more efficiently? Is the new port designed to boost local trade? Or is it designed to serve as a strategic naval outpost for a global superpower? These aren't cynical questions, they are essential ones. The line between aid and exploitation can be incredibly thin, and it often depends entirely on who is benefiting the most. Think about it this way. If someone offers to build you a brand new kitchen for free, you'd be thrilled. But what if the deal is that they get to come over and take whatever they want from your fridge for the next 30 years? Suddenly, it's not such a great deal, is it? This is the dilemma many African nations face. They desperately need infrastructure, but the price of that infrastructure can be their economic sovereignty. The deals are often opaque, the contracts are signed behind closed doors, and the long-term consequences are rarely discussed in public until it's too late and the country is drowning in debt. This dynamic creates a massive contradiction that you can see across the continent. You might see a gleaming, multi-billion-dollar railway line running through a region where children are still learning in schools with no roofs and no books. You can see extravagant government buildings and luxury hotels rising in cities where millions lack access to clean water and reliable electricity. This contrast between lavish, foreign-funded projects and the persistent poverty of the local population tells a story. It suggests that the development is not for everyone, it's for a select few, and for the foreign powers who are pulling the strings. Ultimately, we have to challenge the narrative that foreign involvement automatically equals help. The presence of China, Russia, or the United States is not an act of charity. It is an act of geopolitical strategy. They are in Africa for their own reasons, for resources, for markets, for military advantage, for political influence. While some benefits may trickle down to the African people, the primary goal is to serve the interests of the powerful outsiders. The question isn't whether they are helping, it's whether the help they offer is a genuine partnership or just a more sophisticated form of takeover. Or we can't just point fingers at foreign powers and call it a day. That's only half the story. The uncomfortable truth is that none of this, not the one-sided resource deals, not the crippling loans, not the foreign military bases, could happen without the cooperation of some African leaders themselves. These leaders act as the gatekeepers. They are the ones who hold the keys to the continent's wealth, and they are the ones who decide whether to open the gate to outsiders. Too often, they choose to swing it wide open in exchange for personal gain, power, and security for their own regimes. These leaders become what some might call puppets or clients, serving the interests of their foreign patrons rather than their own people. They sign away their country's natural resources in secretive contracts that enrich a small elite, while the rest of the population sees little benefit. They welcome foreign troops onto their soil to protect their government from their own citizens, rather than addressing the grievances that cause unrest in the first place. This creates a toxic cycle. The more a leader relies on foreign support to stay in power, the less accountable they are to their own people, and the more they must give away to keep that support flowing. This corruption hollows out a nation from the inside. The money that should be used to build schools, hospitals, and create jobs disappears into foreign bank accounts. The democratic process becomes a sham because the leader's power doesn't come from the ballot box. It comes from their patrons in Beijing, Moscow, or Washington. They become caretakers of foreign interests instead of guardians of their nation's future. They are the crucial link in the chain of exploitation, the local facilitators in the global scramble for Africa's soul. It's a betrayal of the trust placed in them by their people. However, it is also crucial to remember that this is not the story of all African leaders. There are many who fight tirelessly for their people, who negotiate hard for better deals, and who genuinely work to build a more prosperous and independent future. The continent is vast and diverse, and leadership is not monolithic. But the challenge posed by these compromised gatekeepers is real and significant. They are the internal obstacle to Africa's self-determination, and overcoming this challenge is just as important as pushing back against the external forces of foreign influence. While governments and foreign powers make deals in boardrooms and presidential palaces, there is another, more powerful story unfolding on the streets. Africa belongs to its people, and its people are not sitting by silently. Across the continent, there is a growing wave of citizens who are standing up and demanding better. They are protesting against corruption, they are challenging unfair deals with foreign corporations, and they are calling for the removal of foreign military forces from their land. They are the true heartbeat of the continent, and their voices are getting louder every day. In countries like Senegal and Nigeria, you see massive youth-led movements leveraging social media to organize protests and demand political change. In places like Niger, citizens have taken to the streets to protest the presence of French and American military bases, arguing that they bring more instability than security. These aren't just angry mobs, they are organized, articulate, and deeply patriotic movements. They are doctors, lawyers, students, and market women, all united by a common belief that their future should be in their own hands, not in the hands of a foreign power or a corrupt elite. They are risking their safety to fight for their sovereignty. But resistance isn't just about protests, it's also about creation. It's in the booming tech hubs of Nairobi and Lagos, where young innovators are building apps and solutions for local problems. It's in the vibrant film industry of Nollywood, which tells African stories to the world on its own terms. It's in the music of artists like Burna Boy or Angelique Kidjo, whose songs carry messages of pride, resilience, and Pan-African unity. This creative explosion is a powerful form of self-determination. It's a declaration that African culture is rich, valuable, and not in need of validation from the outside world. This is the real story of hope for Africa. It's not in a loan from China or a security deal from Russia. It's in the energy, the courage, and the creativity of its 1.4 billion people, the majority of whom are under the age of 25. They are the continent's greatest resource, and they are increasingly unwilling to accept the old narratives of dependency and exploitation. They are building their own future, one protest, one startup, one song at a time. They understand that true independence is not something that is given. It's something that must be constantly fought for and reclaimed. And so, we come back to our original question, who owns Africa? After looking at the history of the Berlin Conference, the new scramble by China, Russia, and the United States, and the complicity of some local leaders, the answer becomes crystal clear. Africa does not belong to America. It does not belong to China. It does not belong to Russia or France or any other foreign power that sees it as a chessboard for their geopolitical games. No contract, no loan, and no military base can ever purchase the soul of a continent. The ownership papers they think they hold are worthless. Africa belongs to the hundreds of millions of people who call it home. It belongs to their cultures, their languages, their histories, and their dreams. It belongs to the farmer in the Rift Valley, the tech entrepreneur in Accra, the student activist in Dakar, and the artist in Kinshasa. It belongs to the generations who fought for independence and to the future generations who will inherit it. The immense value that makes foreign powers fight over Africa, its resources, its people, its spirit, is the very thing that makes it uniquely and irrevocably its own. Foreigners fight over it because they know they don't own it, and they covet it. The path forward is not to isolate Africa from the world, but for the world to engage with Africa as a true equal. It means supporting African self-determination, not undermining it. It means fair trade, not exploitative contracts. It means respecting sovereignty, not establishing military footprints. For those of us watching from the outside, our role is to be informed and to be allies. It means questioning the narratives our own governments feed us about their involvement on the continent. It means supporting organizations that empower local communities and amplify African voices. The future of Africa will not be decided in Berlin, Beijing, or Washington. It will be decided in the bustling markets of Lagos, the classrooms of Kigali, and the hearts of its people. The continent is rising, not as a collection of territories to be owned, but as a powerful, unified force, ready to claim its rightful place in the world. Africa belongs to Africans. It always has, and it always will. The sooner the rest of the world understands that, the better for everyone. So, Learn more, share this story, and support the movement to reclaim Africa, because its future is bright and it belongs to them.